Hi, everyone. We're back with Steve Layman of the Charlottesville Astronomical Society, who's going to share with us tidbits on astronomy. So take it away, Steve.
Thanks, Kathy. Happy to be back here again with you all for the month of June. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the night sky, a little bit about the sun, and some upcoming events. And I've got a PowerPoint with us this afternoon that Kathy, I think, could probably share if any of you would like to see this again. I sent that to her a little earlier, so she could probably forward that to you.
Sure can.
So looking at the night sky, tonight and tomorrow night, we're looking at the strawberry moon. And the interesting thing about the moon this evening is that right below it is the bright star Antares, which is one of the really bright stars in our evening sky. It's about the 15th brightest star in the evening sky. And Antares is called the heart of the Scorpion, or Scorpius. It's in the constellation Scorpio. And although this doesn't show it really clearly with the word, Antares is right there. And it does look a little bit like a scorpion. You've got a tail and you've got the body, and you can kind of imagine where the claws would come out. So the other cool thing about the Scorpion and Antares is that over here on the right of the screen, we've got what's called what's called a globular cluster, okay? And we're going to have the opportunity to see a lot of these this summer as we look in toward the center of our galaxy in the month of June and July. A lot of these globular clusters are in the halo of the galaxy. But first of all, Antares is part of a binary pair. That just means that there are two large stars that are gravitationally bound. And the largest one is a red supergiant. So you might remember Betelgeuse in the winter sky, the left shoulder of Orion. That is also a red supergiant. So it kind of gives you something to compare. And you can actually, as you look at Antares with a telescope or a pair of binoculars, you can actually see the definite redness in the star. M4, M stands for Messier. Charles Messier was a comet hunter back in the 19th century. And a globular cluster is a spherical cluster of older stars that are found in the halo of our galaxy. A lot of the stars, as you look at a picture of a globular cluster, tend to be yellow or reddish. And there are a number of these in the halo of our galaxy, and they are as old as the galaxy. The other interesting thing is as we move into July and we start to look at the constellation that looks a little bit like the teapot, we're going to see that the teapot in its dome has a huge number of these globular clusters. They're fun to find. You can usually find them with a good pair of binoculars and definitely with a telescope. So I would encourage you to go out and when you're looking at Antares, in a pair of binoculars, it's going to look like a smudge to the right. But in a small telescope, maybe a 4-inch telescope or larger, you're going to begin to be able to see the individual stars that globular cluster. As we get into the next couple of days, late at night, this is midnight or after, as the moon kind of descends over the next couple of nights, rises later every night, actually rises about 50 minutes later every evening. We're going to be able to see Saturn and Jupiter just above where the moon will be, especially on June 8th. Saturn will be directly above, Jupiter will be off above that to the right, and these will be, they will look like stars, but really bright stars, and if you've got a pair of binoculars or a telescope, you'll be able to see that they actually turn into the planets that they are. Stars tend to twinkle, and planets resolve into an actual small ball as you look at them. So this is something to look forward to a little after midnight as the moon rises over the next couple of evenings. So one of the things that we don't think too much about in the summer sky is the Big Dipper. Most folks are kind of focused to the south and all the cool things that happen along the ecliptic, that line that the sun follows as it rises from the east and sets in the west. But if you turn back to the north, summer's a great time to see the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper. I'm not sure if that's in the way, but I'm going to pull it out of the way. And the Big Dipper has what we call a pair of pointer stars. When the Dipper's turned upside down, these two stars point to Polaris. Okay, Dubhe, and I think that's pretty close to the pronunciation, is roughly 30 degrees. It's actually 28 degrees. If you hold your fist like this, your closed fist is roughly 10 degrees from here to here. Okay, so as you start at Dubhe and move down to the right, it's going to be roughly 3/5 distance down to the right to find Polaris. Polaris usually shows up fairly well in a light polluted area. We don't have any problem seeing it here in Charlottesville, and I'm sure if you're in Nelson or at Wintergreen, it will show up quite brightly. The Big Dipper shows up really well. The Little Dipper does not show up well in light polluted areas. In Charlottesville, I have a real hard time seeing this portion of the Little Dipper. Okay, when I get out into a darker sky, like you have in Nelson, Augusta, over in that area, you're going to be able to probably see the entirety of the Big Dipper, or the Little Dipper, pardon me. So you can use that concept of your fist being 10 degrees held up to the night sky. And you might say, well, so if I'm a kid, how does that work? And the issue is that adults and children are proportional. So even though the arm is shorter, the proportions still work to where if a child holds up their fist or an adult holds up their fist, it's still that 10 degrees with the closed fist. So in the news last week, I think the 29th, there was a solar flare. We've not heard too much about solar flares for quite a while. I did some checking, and I think the last solar flare that made the news was maybe in 2012. The sun's been undergoing a kind of a quiescent period. It works on an 11-year solar cycle, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the pictures that we've got here come from a couple of really great satellites that we have up in space. This picture in the top area comes from the Solar Dynamics Observatory, and I put a link to it. And these two images come from the SOHO Observatory, or the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory. Both of these are NASA satellites. They're both up out in space, away from the Earth, and both point at the sun pretty much all day. And the cool thing is that if you are used to seeing the sun as we see it as just a kind of a yellow globe, when you go to the SOHO or SDO sites, you can see the sun in through different filters. And so we're looking at the sun here through a filter that leaves or allows us to see it through kind of a lot of the hydrogen alpha portion of the spectrum. And same here, it's a little bit different frequency in the hydrogen alpha spectrum. And then this is more of a white light kind of an image. As the sun this flare went off kind of on what we refer to as the limb of the sun. And so as the sun has rotated around so that this flare is facing us, if you've got a safe solar telescope, you should be able to observe sunspots, which we're going to take a look at here in a minute with a safe solar telescope over the next few days. Let's take a look at what you might see. Actually, we're going to talk a little bit about this sunspot activity. You can see that if we go all the way back at least to 1913, the sun is kind of quiet and then rises in activity roughly every 11 years. It's not really regular. And one of the things that you might notice as you look at what was our current pattern that we're coming out of is that the sun did not get all as excited as you see in through here. There were very few sunspots in this past portion of our solar cycle. And scientists really don't know why, but they're predicting somewhere between here and here, still much less of a sunspot activity with the sun over the next 11 years or so. But a lot of solar scientists are considering that this big flare that we had just the other day is probably signaling the start of our next 11-year cycle. So sunspots are areas of high magnetic activity and low temperature. In the photosphere of the sun, remember the sun is a ball of plasma. It's not solid. It has various layers and densities. But a sunspot in hydrogen alpha looks like this. You think that there's no heat here because you see black. Actually, it's just a cooler area. And this is an area of magnetic flux. And very often when you've got a sunspot, the photosphere is kind of looping. You see the sun throwing off material, and very often that throwing off material happens either from one sunspot to a next, or from one edge of a sunspot to the other edge of a sunspot. Looking at the sun through a white light filter, which is the kind that most folks have access to, this is what you would see when looking at sunspots. So just to give you an idea, this is a pretty impressive sunspot display. This little spot over here, the Earth would probably fit inside of that about 3 or 4 times. So it just gives you an idea of how large the Earth is, or how small the Earth is compared to the size of the sun. So this is a rather active sunspot area. And those of us that have been following the sun for the last few years, week after week, we've seen almost nothing. Haven't seen anything like this for years on the face of the sun. This is probably an image from, I forgot to check the date, but at least back into the 2010s, 2011s at that point. So a couple of good and safe ways to look at the sun. First of all, never, ever, ever, don't you dare ever look at the sun with a telescope or binoculars without some kind of a safe filter, or you will irreversibly damage your eyes. There are all sorts of filters out there available. This is one of the kinds you see for a telescope. This is on the front of a reflecting telescope. For binoculars, you can get a smaller pair of these, and they just fit right over firmly over the lens of the binoculars. Another way to look at the sun, let me get back to that. Another way to look at the sun is to project it onto something. And so what I did here was to build a solar funnel projector. I literally went to Advanced Auto Parts, got myself a big funnel, cut off the edge, took an eyepiece that I had as a spare, put it in the bottom, and we've got a couple of radiator fasteners here, a large at the top, a small one at the bottom. And at the top, what we've got is some material that can be projected against. In this case, it's actually some material from a theatrical company that makes screens. for things. And so you can see that we get a pretty crisp vision of the in white light of the face of the sun. This is from the eclipse back a couple of years ago, 2018 eclipse. This is my telescope and my filter, and I don't remember there being any sunspots that day. That little thing right there is actually a mark that I inadvertently put on with a pen one time when I was pointing to a sunspot. But if a sunspot were going to show up, it would show up as a little splotch. So these are two really great ways to look at the sun. Again, don't look at the sun naked eye through a telescope or binoculars, and it's not a good idea to stare at the sun just naked eye. You can damage your eyes by doing that. So we've got one scheduled for the 15th of August right now. I believe that's a Saturday night. And what we're going to do that night is to allow everybody to sit in family groups, socially distanced apart. And we're going to have one telescope set up. And we're going to be using a system that's called a revolution imager. This little box here is actually a low light camera that fits into the eyepiece receptacle of the telescope. And right here we have a transmitter, and we also have a little screen, but sitting at a distance you wouldn't be able to see from this screen. So what we're going to do is use this transmitter to transmit to those of you that have the Wi-Fi AV app on your Apple product. You can download this from the App Store onto your iPhone or your iPad. I downloaded it just a couple weeks ago. I'm hoping that Apple does not do a whole bunch of upgrades between now and August that might cause this app not to work. The app doesn't get great reviews. I think if you could look carefully, it gets about 2.5 stars, mostly because it's kind of clunky, but once it turns on, it works fine for what we're going to do. It's free, doesn't cost anything, downloads pretty quick. And basically what will happen is I will locate an object with the telescope, get it in focus on my screen, and then it'll transmit to your iPhone or iPad through the app, and you'll be able to see what the telescope is seeing. That way we'll be able to talk about it, but we won't be bringing folks close to each other or close to where other people have had their faces or have been breathing or that sort of thing. So I keep trying to test this out every time it's a clear night. I've also up to now spent about one night working on it, and it seemed to work really nicely. The issue is that every time you change objects, you're dealing with a different brightness. And so the software for the camera, there's internal software here, does a pretty good job of adjusting, but not as nice as you would like to have. So once I find the object, get it in focus, I'll have to do a little bit of adjusting here before I can send a decent picture to you on your app. But at least this is a way that we can do a star party this summer. Yeah, and there are other things out there that people can participate in. The names of a couple of these companies escape me right now, but you can buy a membership to some of these telescopes that hold evening star parties online, and you can follow along with an astronomer who's telling you stories about the night sky or details about what you're looking at. And once we get done here, I'll send Kathy a list of a couple of those things, either later today or tomorrow, so that she can share that with you. That way, if you're starved for photons in the night sky and you don't have your own telescope, you can log on to some of these, I'll call them for-pay telescopes, but the images are generally really nice, and the folks do a good job of describing what you're taking a look at.
Steve, I have two questions or
Okay.
comments about our star party on August 15th.
Okay.
One is that you have to have an Apple product
Right.
in order for this to work. So Android systems, it will not work with, correct?
Right, correct.
And do they upload that app before they come to the event?
Yes, yeah, because they're not going to be able to upload it probably sitting out in the middle of the top of the mountain. So yeah, they should definitely upload that on their phone. It doesn't take up a lot of space. It's a really simple app. And until they connect to my telescope, and we'll tell them how to do that evening, there's not much you can do with the app. So, but they should definitely a couple of days ahead of time take a couple of minutes to download it onto their iPhone or iPad.
Okay, so participants need to be prepared for those two requirements in advance, along
In
with
advance.
chairs and things like that. And if anybody has any questions about the app, they can contact me.
Yeah, they can shoot me an email if they're having problems.
Okay, so I'll have all that information for them too.
Okay. The other thing that I guess we could think about with this, the app would project to a projector if we had a large screen and a projector that you could plug an iPhone or an iPad into. So I don't know if that's something that from your end you could work on. So did you know on June 10th of 2003, the Spirit rover was launched toward Mars. It landed on January 4th, 2004, and last communicated with Earth on March 22nd, 2010. Not bad for a roughly 90-day mission. One of the really great things about our recent missions to Mars is that all of the rovers have far outperformed what their engineering baseline was supposed to be. Again, the Spirit and Opportunity were supposed to only last 90 days. Spirit lasted until 2010, and Opportunity quit responding, I think it was in early 2019. So really long time. The next time we get together, I'm going to do a little bit of a presentation on Perseverance, which is the renamed Mars 2020 rover, which is going to launch toward Mars this summer, I believe in the month of July. So we'll make sure we do a little bit of presentation so that you can see what that particular rover is going to be doing over the next few years. The exciting thing is that it's going to be collecting samples and packaging them. It's a combined mission with the European Space Agency, which is then going to have a rover that's going to come along and pick things up, send them up to a probe that's in the orbit of Mars, and then those things are going to come back to Earth if everything works right. So it's going to be a long time period because all this stuff happens over X number of years, but it's a really exciting mission, and we'll do a presentation on that. Just so you can kind of get an idea of how big the rovers are, this is a picture of Spirit when it was getting ready to be packaged up and loaded on to the rocket. You can see the size compared to the guys in the bunny suits here and here. The Curiosity rover, which is up there now, is a larger than Spirit and Opportunity were. And the Mars 2020 rover uses kind of the same chassis as the current Curiosity rover. So it'll be a similarly sized rover. So I'd like to thank everybody for watching today and let you know that I've got a Facebook page at www.facebook.com/astronomy tidbits. And I usually post something different every day or every other day. It's either recent research in astronomy or a recent astronomical event, or sometimes it's something upcoming. But I tend to keep it pretty fresh. So I hope you'll check in with that. Any questions, Kathy?
Oh, wow, that was a lot of information and very timely information. First thing I wanted to ask is, should my people look at this video in June nightly? Because it sounds like there's an event going on every night that they need to be prepared for.
Yeah, there's all sorts of things. I mean, summertime is a great time to observe. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I just got a reminder about right before we came online, if you've never looked up at the night sky to see the International Space Station, tonight you're going to get a double treat. The International Space Station is going to do a pass between 9:04 and 9:10, almost directly overhead. It's going to start on the northwest horizon and kind of move to the southeast. That's Charlottesville, so that those directions will be off a little bit for the Nelson area, but still, it will be a slow-moving, bright object that will start around 9:04 and finish about 9:10. And then the other cool thing that's happening this evening is that there will be a trail of Elon Musk's Starlink satellites going over. These are SpaceX satellites. They send up a block of them at a time. So tonight, satellites will actually pass overhead in a train. And I saw one last month, the last time they did one of these, and it's so cool because you just see these satellites one at a time following each other, and they end up stretching from horizon to horizon. So we want to keep our fingers crossed for clear skies tonight.
Wow, we've got some serious activity going on this month.
Yeah, so tonight you might want to put on some bug spray or put out a bug light and get the lawn chair out and lean back and look toward the night sky.
Well, that's excellent. Thanks, Steve, again, for all the information
Sure.
that you're giving us to do while we're enjoying our evening, eyes on the skies.
Right.
And I'll be sure to have information for everybody at the end of this video and your email information as well. We have to get it out today so people will know what's going on tonight.
Okay. All right.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
Nice to be with you.